It was just past 1440 when she stepped into the hangar. The sun outside was punishing, casting long lines of heat that shimmered off the tarmac at Laughlin Air Force Base in Texas. Inside the hangar, it was cooler, the air smelling faintly of grease, steel, and jet fuel. The T-6 Texan II stood near the center, its sleek nose angled slightly toward the open bay doors, bright white paint with blue trim. Twin blade propeller steel, canopy closed. To most, it was just a trainer aircraft. To her, it held memories. She moved quietly toward it, shoes making almost no sound on the concrete. No uniform, no insignia, just a pair of gray pants, clean but plain, and a loose blouse under a light jacket. A visitor badge hung from her lanyard, clearly visible but unread by those too busy to look. She stopped a few feet from the aircraft's wing, her eyes swept over the fuselage, noting the wear, the markings, the scratches around the access panels. Then she leaned slightly, examining the underside of the canopy, tracing the lines of the emergency egress handle with her gaze. She stepped closer, paused, tilted her head. From across the bay, a voice snapped through the still air. "Ma'am, step away from the aircraft." The woman didn't flinch. Her eyes didn't leave the canopy. She studied the tension rod, the housing along the top frame. One breath, then another. "You can't be in here," the voice said again, louder this time. A pair of boots marched across the hangar. Technical Sergeant Barnes, late 30s, confidentier, clipboard in hand, not expecting trouble, not expecting hair. He stopped a few feet away, staring at her like she was a misplaced wrench. "This is a restricted area. You need to leave. Now." She finally looked at him, calm eyes, cool voice. "Do you know what this switch does?" Barnes frowned. He didn't answer. She nodded toward the cockpit again. "Just curious," she said softly. His irritation bubbled up fast. He stepped forward, placed a hand on her shoulder. Not rough, but not gentle either. He nudged her back a step. "That's enough. You don't belong near this equipment. I don't know how you got in, but you're about 5 seconds from being escorted out." Across the hangar, 2 young airmen paused by the tool rack. One tried not to smirk. The other leaned closer, whispering something behind a gloved hand. The woman didn't argue. She didn't resist. She glanced down at the concrete floor for a moment. Then she met the sergeant's stare again. She said nothing. Barnes took a breath, straightened his posture. His voice dipped into command mode, the one they taught in NCO leadership school. Forceful, clear, a practiced kind of authority. "This aircraft is an active trainer. No civilian should be touching it. You're in a military environment, and there are protocols." She nodded once. Slowly, the silence that followed stretched longer than expected. Barnes shifted his weight. He looked down at her badge, squinting. Still didn't read it. Still didn't connect the dots. He stepped back, one hand resting on his hip, near the radio clipped to his belt. The woman folded her hands loosely in front of her. She was still as a statue, not defensive, not intimidated, just watching. "You need to wait outside," Barnes said, his voice softening slightly, though still sharp around the edges. She turned and began walking toward the exit without a word. As she passed the young airmen, one of them muttered something under his breath. The other chuckled. She didn't react. Barnes exhaled, shook his head, and walked back toward the workbench, muttering something about civilians and chain of command. Behind him, the Texan II sat quiet and still under the lights, a sleek bird, built for the future. But that hangar had just witnessed a moment pulled straight from the past, a moment soaked in assumption and missed details. No alarms, no confrontation, just a woman with sharp eyes and a question nobody bothered to answer. The woman moved down the corridor with measured steps, The soft hum of fluorescent lights overhead and the faint echo of voices guiding her toward the main training wing. It was just after 1510. She passed through a set of glass doors into the flight training room, where rows of young officers and cadets were hunched over flight plans, checklists, and simulator schedules. The room buzzed with conversation and the occasional shuffle of boots on tile. A few chuckles here. A clipped command there. The energy was typical of a weekday briefing at Laughlin Air Force Base. Focused, but loose around the edges. She didn't speak. She didn't pause. She simply scanned the room once, found an empty chair near the back wall, and sat down. No one recognized her. Her clothes, still plain and unfitted to military standards, blended her into the background. A visitor badge still hung neatly at her chest, but not a single soul looked closely enough to read it. A second lieutenant, young and clean-cut, stepped away from his group and approached. His voice was courteous, the kind of polite but firm tone taught early in leadership school. He gestured slightly as he spoke, pointing toward the hallway behind her. "Ma'am, this area's for squadron personnel only. Are you here for maintenance or—" She looked up. Her voice soft but steady. "I have an appointment with the base commander." That was all. No apology. No explanation. Just a simple, composed answer that left the lieutenant unsure whether to nod or question further. He hesitated, then gave a brief nod and backed away. The noise in the room shifted, not louder, but less focused. Heads turned, glances exchanged, conversations resumed, but with more edge. Someone near the front leaned close to a classmate. "She's probably lost." Or some contractor. Another added under his breath, not unkindly but with assumption baked in. "Maybe janitorial staff. Looks like she took a wrong turn near logistics." The woman didn't react. She sat straight, hands resting lightly on her knees. Her eyes swept the room slowly. She glanced toward the large corkboard, pinned with approach charts and fuel planning graphs. She studied the emergency landing flow for the T-6 Texan II. She looked at a sequence map for visual landings at alternate airfields. No one noticed her interest. No one asked why she looked more like she was evaluating than learning. She could have been a contractor. She could have been someone's aunt. That's all they saw. Around here, the room pulsed with energy. Laughter in one corner. A minor dispute over weather alternates in another. The buzz of a printer spitting out briefing packets near the instructor's desk, yet she sat perfectly still. Her presence carving out a quiet space of discomfort no one could name. Every so often, a cadet would glance back, not to speak, just to check. She didn't fidget. She didn't pull out a phone. She didn't seem out of place in the way they expected, but somehow she didn't belong. And that friction, that mismatch between appearance and presence, settled like a weight in the air. She checked her watch. Not rushed. Not waiting impatiently. Just acknowledging the time. 15:23. Or, as she always heard it in her head, 3:23 in the afternoon. Still, no one asked who she was. She leaned forward slightly, as if studying the whiteboard at the front of the room. Written in dry erase marker was a practice question from a recent simulator scenario. What would be your immediate action following engine failure at pattern altitude? Her gaze lingered on the answer beneath it. Memory stirred. But her expression remained unreadable. Someone muttered near the back. This time Keeter. Still, no one addressed her directly. She waited, and the room, unaware, kept moving around her, never knowing they were being watched. At 1545, the door to the squadron commander's office opened with a soft click. The noise in the room didn't stop right away, but it shifted. A few conversations dropped in volume. Heads turned. Colonel Grant stepped into the flight room, still holding a folder, his glasses pushed up on his nose. His walk was brisk, practiced, comfortable in the room and the authority it carried. But that changed the moment he saw her. He stopped mid-step, For a second, he just looked. Then his spine straightened. His hand rose in a sharp salute. His voice rang out, crisp and formal. "Ma'am, we weren't expecting you until tomorrow morning." The room froze. You could almost hear the breath catch in half a dozen throats. Chairs didn't creak. Pens didn't move. Somewhere near the back, a cup of coffee stopped halfway to someone's mouth. Colonel Grant turned to face the rest of the room. His words were deliberate, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce your new wing commander, Brigadier General Evelyn Hart." Dead silence. All motion stopped. One by one, heads turned toward the woman who, just minutes ago, had been mistaken for a contractor, a janitor, a nobody. She stood slowly. Her posture was effortless, natural, but commanding in a way that made the air feel tighter. At the far end of the room, Technical Sergeant Barnes took a single step back, color drained from his face. His hands, suddenly unsure what to do, hovered near his sides. He looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. She walked toward him without hurry. The click of her shoes against the tile echoed louder than the colonel's announcement. Every eye was on her. But she didn't flinch. She stopped a few feet from Barnes. He didn't move. "Earlier today, you shoved your commanding officer." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They carried like thunder through the stillness. "I asked you a question. You dismissed me. Then you put your hands on me and told me I didn't belong." Her face was calm, not angry, not smug, just still, steady, focused. Around them, a few officers shifted in their seats. One cadet dropped his gaze to the floor. The room had become a lesson. Barnes opened his mouth, closed it again, then tried. "Ma'am, I didn't know. I didn't see." She nodded once. "That's the point. Sergeant, you didn't see because you weren't looking." Her tone never changed. It wasn't personal. It wasn't emotional. It was just truth, laid bare. Respect isn't about recognizing a star on a collar. It's about how you treat people when you think they don't matter. No one breathed. Barnes swallowed hard. His voice was low, almost cracking. "I apologize." "General." Deeply. She gave the smallest nod. "You'll do better. We all will." Then she turned, walked back to the front of the room, and stood beside Colonel Grant. He hadn't said a word since announcing her name. Now he looked at her, quiet admiration in his eyes. She glanced once more across the room. Her expression unreadable. "Carry on." "Colonel." He gave a short nod, then began briefing the squadron. His voice was clear but softer than usual, as if adjusting to a new gravity in the room. As she stepped out, the silence finally cracked. Not with words, not with noise, just a shared understanding that something had shifted, something important, and no one who had been there would forget it. It was just past 1710 when Colonel Grant stepped into the office. The hallway outside had quieted, most of the day's operations winding down. Inside, Brigadier General Evelyn Hart sat behind a plain desk, the overhead light casting a soft glow across a stack of folders she hadn't touched. She looked up when he entered, and for the first time that day, the corners of her mouth curved into something close to a smile. He closed the door gently behind him and stood for a second, almost awkward, like he wasn't sure if he was visiting a superior or an old friend. She gestured toward the chair across from her. He took it. He studied her face. Still calm. Still unreadable. Then he asked it straight. "No ceremony. Why today? Why unannounced? And why the plain clothes?" She looked at him for a moment before answering. "Because I needed to see who people really were. Not when they were being watched, but when they thought they weren't." He nodded slowly, not interrupting. "This place shaped me," she said, and her eyes drifted toward the window, though the blinds were shut. I was 23 when I got my wings right here. I was one of 4 women in a sea of uniforms who didn't know what to do with us. Every mistake I made proved their point. Every success was luck. He leaned back slightly, listening. One afternoon, she continued. We were flying low over Helmand. Ground troops had been ambushed. Visibility was rough. Radio chatter a mess. They needed air cover, or they were going to be overrun. She paused, then looked directly at him. I dropped into the canyon without waiting for approval. It was too tight, too close. And I knew it. But I had eyes on their position, and I knew they didn't have another 5 minutes to wait. We ran 2 strafing paths. One clean, one hot. It cleared the ridge. They lived. I almost didn't. Grant's eyebrows raised slightly. 8 seconds weren't built to be graceful. But she made it back in one piece. That flight ended up in a citation. But she never framed it. You know what stuck with me? She said softly. It wasn't the mission. It was when I got back and someone said, "You were lucky." No one said, "You led." The room fell quiet for a long moment. He exhaled. You could have shown up in dress blues. Walked in with 4 aides and a trumpet line. Instead, you sat in the back and got shoved like a trespasser. She gave a slight shrug. Rank's too easy. Real leadership. That takes patience. Listening. Letting people reveal themselves. He shook his head with a kind of half-laugh. It's rare. Evelyn. That kind of thinking? Most people earn a star and forget what it's like to walk alone. She met his eyes again. He never forgot. And I don't plan to start now. He sat a little straighter. Something shifting in his expression. The respect had been there from the start. Now, it settled deeper. More personal. Welcome back. General, he said quietly. She smiled again. Good to be back. Colonel. And with that, the conversation drifted into a silence that wasn't awkward, but earned. The kind that only came when 2 people understood something important had just passed between them, without fanfare, without force. Just truth. Simple and clear. The sun was just beginning to rise over Laughlin Air Force Base when Brigadier General Evelyn Hart stepped back onto the flight line. It was 0718. Or, as she'd always called it, 7:18 in the morning. The air still carried a trace of the night's chill. Though it would warm fast, as the day picked up, the ramp buzzed with quiet activity. A flight crew was prepping the first T-6 Texan II for takeoff. Checklists in hand. Voices low and focused. Young officers moved with purpose. Uniforms were sharper. Posture straighter. Salutes crisper. It wasn't fear. It was awareness. She wasn't just a visitor now. She was their commander. She took her time walking toward the operations tent, letting her eyes sweep over the field. The aircraft shimmered faintly in the light. Fuel trucks rolled past. A supervisor pointed out checklist items to a trainee. Everyone was busy, but not rushed. Everything felt steadier. Near the edge of the apron, she saw him. Technical Sergeant Barnes stood alone, waiting, not fidgeting, but visibly holding himself at attention. He didn't glance around. His eyes were forward, the kind of posture someone takes when they've had time to reflect. As she approached, he stepped forward and saluted. She returned it calmly. "Ma'am, no excuses. I was wrong." His voice was low but steady. There was no defense in it. No rambling. No stammering. Just the truth. She let the silence hold for a breath, then nodded. "We all learn the hard way. Sergeant, what matters is whether we choose to stay blind or learn to see." He nodded once. Nothing more needed to be said. She moved past him toward the flight operations area, the gravel crunching under her boots. In the distance, the T-6's propeller spun up, engine whining as it taxied out. The student pilot followed every instruction cleanly. Run up. Takeoff checklist. Clearance. Moments later, the aircraft rolled forward. then lifted smoothly into the sky. She stopped at the edge of the runway and watched. The plane climbed at a clean angle, banking slowly, then turned back toward the airfield. It passed overhead once in a wide, graceful arc. Then it climbed again, rolling gently left, then right, before easing into a full barrel roll. Not chauve, not flashy, just tight, clean, and controlled. A tribute. She smiled quietly to herself. The maneuver wasn't required. It wasn't briefed, but it was permitted and well-earned. Her gaze followed the aircraft as it leveled off and disappeared toward the training sector. She stood there a while longer, letting the silence return. Then, just before turning back, her voice slipped into the air. Not loud, not rehearsed, just real. Respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn, with character, with integrity, with how you treat the people no one's watching. The breeze picked up slightly as she walked back toward the flight line. Her presence already felt, even when she was gone from view, and on that runway, in that sky. And in every quiet moment that followed, something had changed, and they all knew it.